He pretended to collapse to expose his fiancée, but the maid's reaction stunned the whole mansion. Alexander Whitmore had learned long ago that everyone had a price. At 34, the tech billionaire had built an empire on algorithms and cold logic, trusting numbers more than people. His penthouse mansion overlooking Central Park was a fortress of marble and glass, beautiful, pristine, and utterly empty of warmth. The only exception to his carefully controlled world was the 9-month-old baby sleeping in the nursery down the hall. Thomas, his son, the child his late wife Emma had given her life to bring into the world, dying from complications just hours after delivery. Alexander stood at his office window, watching the autumn leaves scatter across the terrace. 9 months of grief had hardened into something else, a determination to protect his son from a world full of opportunists and liars. Which was exactly what he suspected his fiancée, Victoria Ashford, to be. Victoria was perfect on paper. 29, from old money, impeccable breeding, and sophisticated enough to navigate his world. She'd pursued him relentlessly after Emma's death, offering comfort that had gradually shifted into something more. 6 months ago, in a moment of weakness and loneliness, he'd proposed. She'd accepted with tears of joy that now, looking back, seemed almost rehearsed. The doubts had started small. The way she tensed when Thomas cried. How she always had an excuse when it was her turn to help with the baby. The barely concealed impatience in her eyes when Alexander discussed his son's milestones. But it was the conversation he'd overheard last week that had frozen his blood. Victoria, on the phone in the garden, her voice carrying through the open window. Just a few more months, mother. Once we're married, I'll convince him to hire a full-time nanny in England. We can travel, live properly. The child will be fine with staff. Alexander had said nothing. Instead, he'd begun to plan. The mansion employed a small staff, but only one person spent significant time with Thomas, Clara Bennett, the young woman he'd hired as a maid 3 months ago. At 28, she was quiet, efficient, and almost invisible in the way she moved through the house. But Alexander had noticed something else, the way Thomas's face lit up when she entered a room. The gentle songs she hummed while dusting the nursery. The genuine smile that transformed her usually serious face when the baby laughed. Clara intrigued him precisely because she asked for nothing. She did her job, cashed her paycheck, and maintained perfect professional distance. In a world where everyone wanted something from Alexander Whitmore, her indifference was almost suspicious. Now, as he finalized his plan, Alexander felt the familiar weight of cynicism settle over him. This test would reveal the truth about both women. He'd pretend to collapse, simulate a medical emergency, and watch how they reacted. Victoria, who claimed to love him, and Clara, who had no reason to care about him at all. He pressed the intercom. "Mrs. Chun, please ask Victoria and Clara to meet me in the main living room in 10 minutes. Tell them it's important." His housekeeper's crisp voice confirmed the message. Alexander loosened his tie and took a deep breath. The living room had cameras in every corner. He'd review the footage later, see the truth that people's words so often obscured. As he walked down the sweeping staircase, he caught sight of Clara emerging from the nursery, a laundry basket balanced on her hip. She was pretty in an understated way, with warm brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore no makeup, and her simple gray uniform somehow made her seem more real than the designer-clad women in his usual circles. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, nodding respectfully before continuing toward the laundry room. "Clara," he called out, surprising himself. She turned, those steady eyes meeting his. "Thank you for taking such good care of Thomas." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "He's a wonderful baby, sir." "It's my pleasure." Before he could respond, Victoria's heels clicked against the marble floor. She appeared in a cloud of expensive perfume, her blonde hair perfect, her smile bright and empty. "Darling, Mrs. Chin said you needed us?" She air-kissed near his cheek, careful not to smudge her lipstick. "Yes. Living room, please." Alexander's voice was neutral as he gestured for both women to follow. Victoria settled gracefully on the white leather sofa, crossing her legs. Clara stood near the doorway, uncertain, her hands clasped in front of her. "Clara, please sit," Alexander instructed. She perched nervously on the edge of an armchair, clearly uncomfortable. "I wanted to," Alexander began, then stopped, pressing his hand to his chest. It wasn't hard to fake distress. The grief he carried made it easy to access pain. He let his breathing become labored, stumbled slightly. "Alexander?" Victoria's voice held a note of concern, but she didn't move. He collapsed to his knees, then fell forward onto the carpet, letting his body go limp. Through barely open eyes, he watched and waited to see who these women truly were. The world seemed to slow down in those first few seconds after Alexander hit the floor. Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Alexander." She stood up but remained frozen by the sofa, her eyes wide with shock. "What's happening? Someone call 911. But she didn't move to help him. She didn't kneel beside him or check for a pulse. She simply stood there, beautiful and utterly useless, her voice rising in panic that sounded almost performative. Clara, on the other hand, was already in motion. She'd launched herself from the armchair before Alexander's body fully settled on the carpet. Her knees hit the floor with a thud that must have hurt, but she didn't seem to notice. Her hands went immediately to his neck, checking for a pulse, her fingers steady despite the fear Alexander could see in her eyes. "Mr. Whitmore? Can you hear me?" Her voice was calm, focused. She turned her head slightly. "Mrs. Chun, call 911 now. Tell them we have an unconscious male, 34 years old, possible cardiac event." The housekeeper's footsteps hurried away. Clara's hands moved with surprising competence, tilting Alexander's head back slightly to check his airway. He felt her fingers on his wrist, counting his pulse against her watch. "His pulse is rapid but steady," Clara reported, more to herself than anyone else. "Breathing is shallow. We need to keep him on his side in case he vomits." Victoria finally moved closer, but only a few steps. "Is he dying? Oh God, is he dying?" Her voice cracked, but Alexander detected something else beneath the panic. Calculation. "Where's his phone? I need to call his lawyer." "The will? We need to." "The will?" Clara's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with an anger Alexander had never seen from the quiet maid. "He's right here, possibly having a heart attack, and you're thinking about his will?" "I didn't mean," Victoria stammered. "I'm just in shock. I don't know what to do." "Then get out of the way," Clara said sharply. She turned back to Alexander, her hand gently touching his face. "Stay with us, Mr. Whitmore. Help is coming. Just stay with us." Her voice broke on the last words, and Alexander felt something warm drop onto his cheek. A tear. Clara was crying. "You're going to be fine," she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. "Thomas needs you. You have to be fine." Alexander heard footsteps, Mrs. Chun returning. "Ambulance is 3 minutes away. I've called Dr. Morrison too." "Good," Clara said, not moving from Alexander's side. "Did you tell them he has a 9-month-old son? They need to know there's a dependent child in case," her voice caught. "In case they need to make arrangements." "Who cares about that right now?" Victoria snapped, and Alexander could hear her pacing. "This is a disaster. The wedding is in 6 weeks. The invitations have been sent. What am I supposed to tell people?" The room went silent except for Clara's steady breathing as she monitored Alexander's fake collapse. "Are you serious right now?" Clara's voice was dangerously quiet. "The man you claim to love is unconscious, and you're worried about wedding invitations?" "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," Victoria shot back. "My mother has organized everything. The venue, the flowers, Your mother?" Clara interrupted. "I just heard you worry about your wedding, your invitations, your mother. I haven't heard you say his name once with any real feeling. Do you even love him? How dare you? You're the maid. You have no right." "I have every right to care about another human being." Clara's hand had moved to hold Alexander's, her grip warm and firm. "Money doesn't make you better than me, and it clearly hasn't made you more human." Alexander felt Clara's thumb stroke across his knuckles, a gesture so tender it made his chest actually tighten. Through his barely open eyes, he could see her face above his, the tears streaming down her cheeks, the fierce protectiveness in her expression, the way she'd positioned herself between him and Victoria as if ready to fight. "The baby," Clara said suddenly. "Someone needs to be with Thomas. If something happens to Mr. Whitmore, that baby will wake up and need." "Oh, for God's sake, the nanny can handle it," Victoria said dismissively. "There is no nanny. Mr. Whitmore takes care of him himself, with help from the staff." Clara's voice was sharp. "You'd know that if you'd ever bothered to spend time with your future stepson." "I spend plenty of time." "You spend time at charity galas with Mr. Whitmore where you can be photographed," Clara corrected. "You've never changed Thomas's diaper. Never given him a bottle. You hold him for pictures and hand him back the second he gets fussy." The silence that followed was damning. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Clara squeezed Alexander's hand. "They're almost here. You're going to be okay. I promise you're going to be okay." The depth of emotion in her voice shook something loose in Alexander's carefully controlled heart. This woman, who owed him nothing more than an honest day's work, was fighting for his life with everything she had. While his fiancée— "I need some air," Victoria announced. "This is too much. I'll be on the terrace." "Of course you will," Clara muttered. As Victoria's heels clicked away, Clara leaned closer to Alexander. "I don't know if you can hear me, Mr. Whitmore, but your son needs you. Whatever is happening, you have to fight through it. Thomas has already lost his mother. He can't lose you too." Alexander felt her forehead rest gently against his shoulder, her whole body trembling. "Please don't die," she whispered. "Please." The paramedics burst through the door moments later, and Clara reluctantly moved aside, answering their questions with precise, helpful information. She'd noted the exact time he'd collapsed, his symptoms, his medical history that she somehow knew from managing the household. As they prepared to load him onto a stretcher, Alexander made his decision. He'd seen enough. He knew everything he needed to know. His eyes opened fully, and he sat up. The paramedics jumped back in surprise. Clara's hand flew to her chest, her eyes wide with shock and relief. From the terrace, he heard Victoria's stilettos clicking rapidly back toward the living room. "Mr. Whitmore," the lead paramedic exclaimed. "Sir, please lie back down. You've just regained consciousness." "I didn't lose it," Alexander said quietly, his eyes fixed on Clara's face. He watched the relief transform into confusion, then understanding, then something that looked like hurt. "You were conscious?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "The whole time?" Before he could answer, Victoria rushed in, her face a mask of joy and relief. "Oh, thank God. Alexander, darling, you're all right." She tried to embrace him, but he held up a hand, stopping her. "This was a test," he said, his voice cutting through the room like ice. "And you failed." Victoria froze. "What?" Alexander stood slowly, waving off the confused paramedics. "I apologize for wasting your time," he told them. "Please submit your bill for the call-out. This was necessary, but I'm fine." The paramedics exchanged glances, clearly annoyed but professional. As they packed up their equipment, Alexander turned to face Victoria fully. "I've had doubts," he said simply. "About us. About whether you truly care for me, or just the lifestyle I represent." "That's ridiculous." Victoria's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "I love you. You love the idea of being Mrs. Alexander Whitmore," he corrected. "When you thought I was dying, your first thought was about the wedding invitations. Your second was about my will. You never once checked if I was breathing. Never called my name with any real feeling. And you were worried about what to tell people at the country club." I was in shock. Victoria's voice rose defensively. "People react differently to trauma." "Clara was in shock too," Alexander interrupted, his gaze shifting to the maid who still knelt on the floor, looking stunned and pale. "But her first instinct was to save my life. She checked my vitals, called for help, positioned my body properly. She knew my medical history, thought about my son, held my hand, and begged me not to die." Clara stood slowly, backing toward the door. "I should go," she said softly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overstep. Don't apologize, Alexander said, his voice gentler than anyone in the room had ever heard it. You're the only person in this house who acted with genuine compassion. Victoria's eyes darted between them, her expression darkening. This is insane. You staged a fake medical emergency to test me? What kind of sociopath does that? The kind who's been lied to and manipulated his entire life, Alexander replied coolly. The kind who's watching someone try to become his son's stepmother when she can barely stand to be in the same room as the child. I never said. I heard you on the phone last week, talking to your mother about sending Thomas away with a nanny once we were married, about how you could finally live properly without the burden of a baby. Victoria's face went white, then red. You were eavesdropping? In my own home? Alexander's laugh was bitter. You were in my garden, on my property, planning to remove my son from my daily life. And you think I'm the villain here? Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, her usually neutral expression showing a hint of satisfaction. Shall I have Miss Ashford's belongings packed, Mr. Whitmore? Yes, Alexander said without hesitation. The engagement is over. You can't be serious. Victoria's shock was genuine now. Over one conversation? One bad reaction during a crisis you faked. I'm serious. Alexander pulled the engagement ring from his pocket. He'd removed it before the test, knowing this outcome was likely. This was never going to work. I see that now. You want the prestige, the money, the status. You don't want the reality of my life, which includes a baby who cries at night and needs constant attention. Victoria stared at the ring, her jaw tight. You're making a mistake. You're going to end up alone, Alexander. You and your precious baby, isolated in this cold mansion because you can't trust anyone. Maybe, he acknowledged, but I'd rather be alone than with someone who sees my son as an inconvenience. Victoria snatched the ring from his palm, her eyes glittering with anger and tears.
Fine.
But don't come crawling back when you realize what you've lost. She turned on her heel and stormed toward the stairs, presumably to supervise the packing of her things. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of Thomas beginning to fuss in the nursery. I'll get him, Clara said automatically, still looking shell-shocked. Clara, wait. Alexander's voice stopped her. I owe you an apology. That was manipulative and wrong. I shouldn't have used you as an unwitting participant in my test. She turned back, her arms wrapped around herself. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Whitmore. I'm just the maid. You're not just anything, Alexander said, and he was surprised by the intensity in his own voice. You showed more genuine concern for my well-being in 5 minutes than Victoria has shown in 6 months. And the way you thought about Thomas made sure he'd be cared for even if I died. He paused, struggling with unfamiliar emotions. Why do you care so much? Clara's eyes glistened with fresh tears. Because everyone deserves to have someone who cares if they live or die. And because that baby upstairs has already lost so much. He deserves better than a parade of people who see him as an obstacle to your fortune. The honesty in her words hit Alexander like a physical blow. Is that how you see the people in my life? As fortune hunters? I try not to see anything, Mr. Whitmore. I just clean, care for Thomas when you need help, and mind my own business. She moved toward the door again. But since we're being honest, yes. I've watched Miss Ashford for 3 months. I've never once seen her look at you the way you deserve to be looked at. And how's that? Clara met his eyes, and for a moment, the careful walls she maintained crumbled. Like you're a person, not a prize. Like your happiness matters more than your bank account. Like you're worth loving for who you are, not what you can provide. The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Thomas's cries grew louder upstairs, breaking the moment. I really should. Clara gestured toward the nursery. Go, Alexander said softly. I'll be up in a moment. Alexander stood alone in the vast living room, the weight of what had just transpired settling over him like a heavy cloak. Through the windows, he could see Victoria on her phone, no doubt calling her mother with a dramatically edited version of events. In a few hours, his social circle would be buzzing with rumors.
He didn't care.
What occupied his mind was the image of Clara's face when she'd thought he was dying. The raw fear, the desperate determination, the tears she hadn't tried to hide. No one had looked at him like that since Emma.
Emma.
His brilliant, warm-hearted wife who'd seen past his wealth to the man struggling underneath. She'd been the only person he'd ever fully trusted, and losing her had nearly destroyed him. For 9 months, he'd been operating on autopilot, caring for Thomas mechanically while feeling nothing but numbness and grief. Until today. Until he'd felt Clara's tears on his face and heard the break in her voice when she'd begged him not to die. Upstairs, Thomas's cries had quieted. Alexander climbed the stairs slowly, his mind working through everything he knew about his quiet, competent maid. Clara Bennett had appeared at his door 3 months ago with impeccable references and a calm, professional demeanor. Mrs. Chun had hired her on the spot, impressed by her work ethic and gentle manner. She'd integrated seamlessly into the household, never gossiping, never overstepping, never asking for special treatment. But Alexander had noticed small things. The way she winced sometimes when lifting heavy objects, as if old injuries pained her. The fact that she never mentioned family or friends, never took phone calls, never made plans for her days off. The sadness that sometimes shadowed her eyes when she thought no one was watching. She was running from something. Or hiding. Alexander recognized the signs because he'd been doing the same thing in his own way. He reached the nursery to find Clara sitting in the rocking chair, Thomas content in her arms as she sang softly. "Hush, little baby, don't you cry. Clara's gonna sing you a lullaby. And if that lullaby won't do, Clara's gonna stay right here with you." She'd changed the words, he realized. Made them personal. When she noticed him in the doorway, she stopped abruptly, her cheeks flushing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore. I was just—" "Don't stop," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "He likes your voice." Clara looked down at the baby, who was fighting sleep, his small fist wrapped around her finger. "He's such a good boy. He just needed a clean diaper and some comfort." Alexander watched them together. The tender way she held his son, the gentle rocking, the natural ease between them. Thomas looked at Clara the way he'd looked at Emma, with complete trust and affection. "How did you know so much about medical emergencies?" Alexander asked quietly. "The way you handled the situation downstairs, checking my pulse, my airways, positioning my body, that wasn't something you learned from cleaning houses." Clara's arms tightened slightly around Thomas. "I was pre-med in college. 3 years before." She trailed off, her jaw tightening. "Before I had to leave." "What happened?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, still not meeting his eyes, she spoke. "My father got sick. Cancer. My mother had died when I was young, so it was just the 2 of us. I dropped out to take care of him, used my tuition money for his treatments. He lived for 2 more years.
Good years, mostly."
"I'm sorry," Alexander said, and meant it. "After he died, I didn't have the money to go back to school. Student loans, medical bills, funeral costs." She shrugged, still focused on Thomas. "So, I started cleaning houses. It's honest work and I'm good at it." "You're overqualified for it," Alexander observed. "Maybe. But it gives me time to think, to be invisible. After everything with my dad, I needed quiet, simplicity." She finally looked up at him. "Your home provided that. Or it did, until today." Alexander moved into the room, sitting on the ottoman near the rocking chair. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." Clara stiffened slightly, but nodded. "When you thought I was dying, you were crying. Why?" She bit her lip, clearly struggling with the answer. "Because it would have been a waste," she said finally. "You're young, you have a beautiful son, you have your whole life ahead of you. And because—" She paused, taking a shaky breath. "Because I know what it's like to watch someone die when they shouldn't. When there's still so much left unlived. I couldn't bear the thought of Thomas going through what I went through." "Is that the only reason?" Their eyes met, and Alexander saw her internal struggle. Professional boundaries warred with something deeper, something she'd clearly been hiding. Mr. Whitmore. Alexander, he corrected gently. After today, I think we can dispense with formalities. Alexander, she repeated, the name soft on her lips. I can't. This isn't appropriate. What isn't appropriate? You know what? Clara stood carefully, placing a sleeping Thomas in his crib with practiced ease. She turned to face Alexander, her hands clasped in front of her, that professional mask sliding back into place. You just ended your engagement. You're emotionally vulnerable. And I'm your employee. Anything I say right now would be taking advantage of the situation. Alexander stood as well, closing the distance between them slightly. Not enough to threaten, just enough to show he was listening. What if I told you that test today wasn't just about Victoria? What if I told you I've been watching you for weeks, seeing the way you care for my son, the kindness you show without expecting anything in return? Clara's breath caught. Don't what? Don't acknowledge that you're the first person in years who's made me feel something other than emptiness? Don't notice that my sun lights up when you enter a room? Don't confuse gratitude with something else, Clara interrupted, her voice trembling. I saved your life today. Or, I thought I did. That creates a false sense of connection. In a few days, you'll realize I'm just the maid who overstepped, who cried over her employer like some character in a romance novel, and you'll feel awkward and distant and probably want to fire me. Is that really what you think? Alexander asked softly. It's what I know, Clara said firmly. I've seen it before. Rich men who notice the help when they're vulnerable, who mistake availability for compatibility. And I can't, her voice broke. I can't afford to lose this job. I need the salary, the stability. So please, Mr. Whitmore, can we just pretend today didn't happen? Can we go back to you being the distant billionaire and me being the invisible maid? What if I don't want to be distant anymore? The question hung between them. What if I'm tired of being alone in a mansion full of people who only see my net worth? Clara closed her eyes, a tear sliding down her cheek. Then find someone in your own social circle. Someone appropriate. Someone who won't make your life complicated. My life is already complicated, Alexander said. And everyone in my social circle is exactly like Victoria. Beautiful, polished, and ultimately empty. You don't know me, Clara whispered. You think you do because I take care of your son and keep your house clean, but you don't know anything real about me. Then tell me, Alexander challenged gently. Tell me something real. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze with painful honesty. I'm 28 years old, and I'm terrified all the time. Terrified of being poor again, of not being able to pay rent, of ending up alone with no family and no future. I work 2 jobs, here during the day and online tutoring at night. I haven't bought new clothes in a year. I eat the meals Mrs. Chun makes for staff because it saves me grocery money. And some days, the only thing that makes me smile is your son's laugh. The raw vulnerability in her confession made Alexander's chest ache. Clara. I'm not your equal, Alexander. I'm not even close. You live in a penthouse worth $50 million. I share a studio apartment in Queens with a roommate I barely know. We exist in completely different worlds. My wife grew up in a trailer park in Ohio, Alexander said quietly. She put herself through MIT on scholarships and student loans. When we met, she was eating ramen for dinner every night and working 3 part-time jobs. Our different worlds didn't matter because we saw each other, really saw each other. Clara's expression softened slightly. Emma sounds like she was wonderful. She was, Alexander agreed. And she would have liked you. She would have appreciated the way you care for Thomas. I should go, Clara said, moving toward the door. It's late, and you've had an emotionally exhausting day. As she passed him, Alexander caught her hand gently. Thank you. For today. For caring whether I lived or died. For being real when everyone else in my life is performing. Clara looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. You deserve people who are real, Alexander. You deserve someone who loves you for you. So do you, he said softly. She pulled her hand away gently, that sad smile returning. Good night, Mr. Whitmore. It's Alexander, remember? Good night, Alexander. She left, and he stood alone in the nursery, listening to his son's soft breathing, feeling more awake than he had in months. The mansion felt different the next morning, as if yesterday's revelations had shifted its very foundation. Alexander woke early, as he always did, but instead of immediately diving into work emails, he found himself drawn to the kitchen, a space he rarely occupied. Mrs. Chen looked up in surprise from her coffee. "Mr. Whitmore, you're up early." "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, accepting the cup she automatically poured for him. "Is Clara here yet?" "Should arrive any minute. She's always punctual." Mrs. Chen's knowing eyes studied him. "That was quite a scene yesterday. You disapproved of my methods." "I disapproved of Miss Ashford from day one," the housekeeper said bluntly. She'd been with the family for 20 years and had earned the right to speak freely. "But your test was cruel, even if it was effective." "I know." Alexander stared into his coffee. "I need to apologize properly to Clara. Make sure she understands." "That you've noticed her?" Mrs. Chen interrupted. "Sir, forgive me for overstepping, but I've watched you watch that girl for weeks now. And I've watched her watch you when she thinks no one's looking. Yesterday just brought everything to the surface. She thinks I'm confused, mistaking gratitude for something else." "Are you?" The question made Alexander pause.
Was he?
He examined his feelings with the same analytical precision he applied to business decisions. The way his day felt brighter when he heard Clara's voice in the house. How he'd started working from home more often just to catch glimpses of her moving through the rooms. The peace he felt watching her with Thomas, seeing his son happy and safe in her care. "No," he said finally. "I'm not confused." "Then what are you?" "Terrified," Alexander admitted. "Emma's death nearly destroyed me. The thought of caring for someone again, of being that vulnerable." He set down his coffee cup with slightly shaking hands. "What if I lose her too?" "What if you don't?" Mrs. Chun countered. "What if you're given a second chance at happiness and you're too afraid to take it?" The sound of the service entrance opening ended their conversation. Clara's voice drifted in as she greeted the morning security guard, her tone warm and friendly, so different from the careful formality she used with Alexander. Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow at him. "Be gentle.
And be honest."
That girl's been hurt enough in her life." Alexander nodded, waiting as Clara entered the kitchen in her usual gray uniform, her hair pulled back, her face clean of makeup.
She stopped short when she saw him.
"Mr. Whitmore, I didn't expect. I wanted to catch you before the day started," Alexander said, standing. "Can we talk?" "In my office." Her expression shuddered immediately. "Of course." They walked through the quiet mansion, their footsteps echoing on marble floors. Alexander's office was all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the park below. He gestured for Clara to sit, but she remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her. "Am I being fired?" she asked quietly.
"What?"
"No." Alexander was genuinely shocked. "Why would you think that?" "Because I overstepped yesterday. I said things I shouldn't have, things that were inappropriate given our positions." "Clara, please sit down." When she reluctantly perched on the edge of a leather chair, he sat across from her. "You did nothing wrong. You acted with compassion and honesty in a situation I created. If anyone should be apologizing, it's me." "I understand why you did it," she said softly. "You needed to know the truth about Miss Ashford. I would have done the same thing in your position." "Would you have?" Alexander leaned forward. "Would you really manipulate people like that? It seems contrary to everything I know about you." Clara met his eyes. "You don't know me, remember? We established that yesterday." "Then help me know you," Alexander said. "Have dinner with me tonight." Her eyes widened. "I can't. Not as employer and employee. As two people who had an intense experience yesterday and need to process it. Please." "Alexander." "I'm not asking you on a date," he lied, because he could see the panic in her eyes. "I'm asking for your company. Your honest company. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" Clara studied him for a long moment. "What about Thomas?" "Mrs. Chen can watch him for a few hours."
Or,
An idea struck him. "Or you could help me with him first, and then we'll eat after he's asleep. Here in the dining room." Nothing formal or intimidating. That's still crossing a line. The line was crossed yesterday when you cried over my supposedly dying body, Alexander said gently. I think we can have dinner together without the world ending. A small smile tugged at her lips. You're persistent. I'm a billionaire. Persistence is how I got here. He softened his tone. Please, Clara. Just dinner. Just conversation. She took a deep breath. Just dinner. And if at any point this gets weird or uncomfortable, you can leave. No consequences, no awkwardness. You keep your job, we go back to professional distance if that's what you want. Okay, she said finally. Okay. The rest of the day passed in a strange, charged atmosphere. Alexander tried to work, but found himself listening for Clara's movements through the house. The soft humming as she cleaned. The gentle voice she used when checking on Thomas during his nap. The quiet efficiency with which she managed the household. Around 4 o'clock, Alexander abandoned his desk and went to find her. She was in the library, dusting the high shelves, her uniform sleeve riding up to reveal a faint scar on her forearm. Clara. She startled, nearly dropping her duster. You shouldn't sneak up on people. Sorry. He moved closer, genuinely curious now. How did you get that scar? Her hand automatically covered it. Kitchen accident. Years ago. She was lying. Alexander had interviewed enough people to recognize evasion. But he didn't push. Instead, he asked, would you help me give Thomas his bath? I'm still not great at it, and he seems to like you more than me anyway. The hurt that flashed across Clara's face surprised him. He doesn't like me more. You're his father. He loves you. He cries less with you. Because you're tense when you hold him, Clara said bluntly. Babies pick up on that. You're still grieving, still scared, still holding yourself at a distance even from your own son. The accuracy of her observation stung. Teach me, then. Teach me how to be relaxed with him. Clara searched his face for mockery and found none. All right, she said softly. Let's give him a bath. 20 minutes later, Alexander found himself kneeling by the baby tub in the nursery bathroom, Clara beside him, both of them focused on a delighted Thomas who was splashing and babbling. See how he reaches for the rubber duck? Clara guided Alexander's hand. He's learning cause and effect. Give him the duck, let him drop it, hand it back. Simple, but important. Alexander followed her instructions, and Thomas squealed with joy, his whole face lighting up. Something in Alexander's chest cracked open at that sound, pure, uncomplicated happiness from his son. There, Clara said softly. That's the face he needs to see. Not worry or fear. Just love. I do love him, Alexander said, surprised by the thickness in his throat. I just don't know how to show it without Emma here to guide me. Clara's hand covered his on the edge of the tub. You show it every day just by trying. By being here, by caring, by wanting to learn. That's more than a lot of fathers do. Their eyes met over the bathtub, and Alexander felt it again. That pull, that connection he'd been trying to deny. Clara felt it too. He could see it in the way her breath caught, the way her pupils dilated slightly. Thomas splashed water between them, breaking the moment. They both laughed, and the tension eased into something warmer, more natural. By the time Thomas was clean, dried, fed, and sleeping peacefully in his crib, the evening had settled over the city. Clara moved to leave, but Alexander caught her hand. Dinner, remember? She nodded, suddenly shy. I should change first. This uniform is fine, Alexander said. Or there are clothes upstairs that belong to Emma. I've been meaning to donate them, but...
He paused.
You're similar in size. If you'd feel more comfortable. I couldn't, Clara said immediately. That wouldn't be appropriate. Nothing about today has been appropriate, Alexander pointed out. But it's been real. And I'd like more of that if you're willing. Clara hesitated, then nodded. Okay. But not Emma's clothes. I'll be fine as I am. They made their way to the smaller dining room. Not the formal space that seated 20, but the cozy breakfast room that overlooked the terrace. Mrs. Chun had outdone herself. A simple but elegant meal of roasted chicken, vegetables, and fresh bread. She's a romantic, Alexander said, seeing Clara's surprised face. And she approves of you, which is rare. Mrs. Chen didn't speak to Victoria for the first month they overlapped. Clara laughed, the sound like music in the quiet room. Mrs. Chen is wonderful. She's been very kind to me. They sat across from each other, and for a few minutes, there was only the clink of silverware and comfortable silence. Then Alexander asked the question he'd been holding all day. Why do you really think I'm confused about my feelings? Clara set down her fork, her expression serious. Because yesterday was intense and emotional. You ended your engagement, I had a panic response to thinking you were dying, and now your brain is connecting those two things. Gratitude and attraction can look very similar in the moment. I'm not grateful, Alexander said. Well, I am, but that's not what this is. Then what is it? He considered his words carefully. For 9 months, I've been numb, going through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. Work, Thomas, sleep, repeat. And then you showed up and slowly, so slowly I didn't notice at first, color started coming back into my world. Clara's eyes glistened. Alexander, the way you hum while you work. How you remember that Thomas likes his bottles slightly warmer than room temperature. The fact that you notice when the orchids in the hallway need water. You see things. You care about things. And somewhere along the way, I started caring about whether you'd be here the next day. That's not love, Clara said gently. That's loneliness. Maybe it started as loneliness, Alexander conceded. But it's become something more. And I hope you feel it too. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared. So am I. You could hurt me so easily. You have all the power here. My job, my livelihood, my peace of mind. I would never. You wouldn't mean to, Clara interrupted. But intentions don't always matter. In 6 months, you might wake up and realize I'm not enough. Not sophisticated enough, not educated enough, not part of your world. And I'll be destroyed because I'll have let myself hope. Alexander stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair, the same way she'd knelt beside him yesterday. Look at me. She did, tears threatening to spill. I'm going to be completely honest with you, he said softly. I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's love or loneliness or something in between. But I know I want to find out. And I know that I haven't felt this alive since Emma died. You make me want to be better, not just for Thomas, but for myself. You make me want to trust again. Trust is earned, Clara whispered. Then let me earn yours, Alexander said. Give me a chance. Give us a chance. Not as employer and employee, but as two broken people who might be able to help each other heal. Clara's hand came up to touch his face, a gesture so tender it took his breath away. What if we break each other instead? Then at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have been brave enough to feel something real. She leaned down and he leaned up, and their lips met in a kiss that was tentative and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. This is crazy, Clara said. Completely. Your social circle will hate me. I don't care about them. The media will have a field day. Let them. Thomas should be your priority.
He is.
Which is why I want someone in his life who genuinely loves him, who lights up around him, who sees him as more than an accessory or obstacle. Clara closed her eyes. I do love him. I tried to keep professional distance, but he's so sweet and precious and you can't help but care, Alexander finished. I know the feeling. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. If we do this, and I mean if we go slow, we figure out what this is before we make any big decisions or changes. Agreed. And if at any point it's not working, we end it cleanly. No drama, no manipulation. Agreed. And you have to promise me something, Clara said, her voice firm despite the tears on her cheeks. Anything. Promise me you'll never test me like you did yesterday. No games, no tricks. Just honesty between us, even when it's hard. Alexander felt shame wash over him. I promise. That was wrong of me, and I'm sorry. Clara studied him for a long moment, then nodded.
Okay.
Then okay. Let's see where this goes. They smiled at each other like teenagers, nervous and excited and terrified all at once. And in the nursery down the hall, Thomas slept peacefully, unaware that his world was about to become whole again. 3 months later, the first snow of winter dusted Central Park, transforming the view from Alexander's windows into a wonderland. Inside the mansion, life had settled into a new rhythm, one that felt for the first time in over a year like an actual home. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor of the living room. Thomas, now a year old and pulling himself up on furniture, using her knees as leverage to stand. His triumphant babbling filled the space as he took one wobbly step, then another, before falling onto his well-padded bottom. Did you see that? Clara called out. Alexander. He took 3 steps. Alexander emerged from his office, abandoning a conference call without hesitation. These days, Thomas's milestones took priority over billion-dollar deals. He dropped to the floor beside Clara, his tie askew, his usually perfect hair slightly mussed. Show Daddy, Clara encouraged, setting Thomas on his feet again. The baby beamed at his father and launched himself forward, taking 4 steps this time before Alexander caught him, lifting him high in the air. That's my boy. You're walking. Thomas giggled, and Clara's heart swelled watching them together. The distance that had once characterized Alexander's interactions with his son had completely dissolved. He was present now, fully, completely present, in a way that transformed them both. He's growing so fast, Clara said softly, reaching over to straighten Thomas's shirt. Too fast, Alexander agreed, settling the baby on his lap. Mrs. Chen wants to know if we're having a party for his first birthday next month. We, Clara noticed, not I. Over the past 3 months, the lines between employer and employee had blurred almost completely. Clara still handled household tasks, but now it was because she wanted to help, not because it was her job. Alexander had insisted she cut back to part-time, supplementing her income generously so she could pursue her education again. She'd started online pre-med courses 2 weeks ago. What do you think? Alexander asked, his eyes warm as they met hers. Small gathering or big celebration? Small, Clara said immediately. Just the people who actually matter to him. Mrs. Chun, maybe a couple of the staff who dote on him. Nothing fancy or performative. Alexander smiled. You know me too well already. Someone has to keep you grounded. They'd been careful these past months, taking things slowly as promised. There had been dates, real ones, where Alexander took her to small restaurants where no one recognized him. Long conversations late into the night after Thomas was asleep. Stolen kisses in the hallway. Slow building of trust between 2 people who'd both been hurt by loss. The media had eventually caught on, of course. Photos of billionaire Whitmore's mystery woman had circulated, accompanied by speculation and judgment. Clara's background had been picked apart, her lack of college degree, her working-class roots, her Cinderella story. It had been brutal, but Alexander had been fierce in his protection of her, issuing a rare public statement that his personal life was private and anyone who harassed Clara would face legal consequences. The furor had died down, though the society pages still buzzed with gossip. Victoria had sold her story to a tabloid, painting herself as the victim of Alexander's cruel emotional games. The article had hurt, even though Clara knew it was mostly lies. Alexander had held her through that night, reassuring her that Victoria's bitterness was her own problem. I have something for you, Alexander said now, reaching into his pocket. Clara's breath caught. If that's what I think it is. It's not, he said quickly, seeing her panic. I promised we'd go slow, and I meant it. This is something else. He pulled out a key, simple, silver, freshly cut. A key to the mansion? Clara was confused. I already have access. Not as an employee, Alexander interrupted. As someone who lives here. If you want to. Clara stared at him, her heart pounding. You're asking me to move in? I'm asking you to make this your home. Officially. Your studio apartment in Queens is too far away, And you're here most of the time anyway. Thomas asks for you when you're not here. He started saying Clara before he says duh, which is both hilarious and slightly wounding to my ego. Clara laughed despite her shock. Alexander, moving in together is a big step.
I know.
Which is why I'm not asking you to move into my bedroom, he clarified. There's a suite on the 3rd floor. Beautiful views. Private bathroom, sitting room. It would be yours completely. No expectations, no pressure. Just be here. With us. As part of our family. Family, Clara whispered, testing the word. That's what you've become, Alexander said softly. To both of us. Mrs. Chen already considers you her daughter. She's been conspiring with me about this for weeks. And Thomas. He looked down at the baby, who was trying to eat his own foot. He loves you, Clara. Almost as much as I do. The words hung in the air. It was the first time either of them had said it out loud. You love me? Clara's voice was barely audible. Alexander set Thomas gently on his playmat, then turned to face Clara fully. I love you. I think I started falling the day you threw yourself across the room to save a man you barely knew. I know I was gone completely when I watched you rock my son and sing him lullabies you made up just for him. And I was certain when you stood up to Victoria, fearless and fierce, protecting what matters. Tears streamed down Clara's face. I love you too. I tried not to. It seemed impossible and terrifying and yet here we are, Alexander finished, cupping her face in his hands. Two impossible people in an impossible situation that somehow feels more right than anything in my life has felt in years. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring months of restrained emotion into it. When they pulled apart, they were both breathless. Is that a yes to moving in? Alexander asked hopefully. Clara laughed, wiping her eyes. It's a yes to trying.
To taking the next step.
To building something real together. That's all I need to hear. Thomas chose that moment to pull himself up on the coffee table and take several steps toward them, shrieking with delight. Both adults moved to catch him, their hands meeting around his small body, their eyes meeting over his head. We're really doing this, Clara said wonderingly. Building a life together. We really are, Alexander confirmed. And I promise you, Clara, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust. Of your love. You already are, she said softly. You're not the cold, distant man I met 6 months ago. You're warm and present and real. You're an amazing father. And you're brave enough to open your heart again after devastating loss. That takes more courage than anything. You gave me that courage, Alexander said. You and Thomas. You reminded me that life is worth living fully, not just surviving. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, her timing impeccable as always. Shall I have the 3rd floor suite prepared, then? Clara and Alexander both turned to her, caught. How did you? Clara started. I've been managing this household for 20 years, Mrs. Chen said with a knowing smile. I know everything. And for what it's worth, I think you're perfect for each other. Emma would have approved. The mention of Emma might have been painful once, but now it felt like a blessing. Alexander had shared everything about his late wife with Clara, the love, the loss, the grief that had nearly consumed him. And Clara had honored that, never trying to replace Emma but creating her own space in the family story. She would have, Alexander agreed quietly. She always believed in second chances. Then it's settled, Mrs. Chen declared. I'll have your things moved up this weekend, Clara. And I'm making Thomas's favorite cookies to celebrate. As the housekeeper bustled away, clearly delighted, Clara turned back to Alexander. This is really happening. Having second thoughts? Not even for a moment, Clara said firmly. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That evening, after Thomas was asleep, Clara and Alexander stood together on the terrace overlooking the glittering city. Snow fell gently, muffling the usual sounds of traffic and creating a cocoon of peace around them. I never thought I'd feel this way again, Alexander admitted, his arm around Clara's shoulders.
Happy.
Hopeful. Like the future is something to look forward to rather than just endure. I never thought I'd have a future like this at all, Clara replied. When my dad died, when I gave up on medical school, I thought I'd peaked. That life would just be getting by, surviving. You and Thomas gave me hope again. Purpose. You're going to be an incredible doctor someday, Alexander said with certainty. And I'm going to be there every step of the way, supporting you. Even when I'm buried in textbooks and cranky from lack of sleep? Especially then. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform the park below. Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, the loss, the struggle, the moment she'd answered a want ad for a maid position and walked into a cold mansion occupied by a heartbroken man and his motherless son. She thought about the fake collapse that had revealed real feelings. The tears she'd cried thinking Alexander was dying. The slow, careful building of trust between two wounded souls. Do you ever wonder what Victoria's doing now? Clara asked. No, Alexander said, honestly. She was a mistake I almost made. But she also inadvertently brought you into my life, so I suppose I should thank her for that. I heard she's engaged to a hedge fund manager. Good for her. I hope she finds what she's looking for. Alexander turned Clara to face him. But I've already found everything I need. You, Thomas, this strange little family we're building. It's more than I deserve. You deserve everything good, Clara said fiercely. You deserve love and happiness and a partner who sees you, not your bank account. I have that, Alexander said, kissing her forehead. I have you. Inside, Thomas stirred in his crib, making the soft sounds that meant he'd wake soon. Without discussion, both Clara and Alexander headed inside, their movements synchronized after months of shared parenting. They stood together over the crib, watching their son, because that's what he was now, theirs. Settle back into sleep. He's going to have such a good life, Clara whispered. So much love. Thanks to you, Alexander said. You brought warmth back to this house. You taught me how to be a father instead of just a provider. You made us whole again. We made each other whole, Clara corrected. That's what love does. As they walked together toward their separate bedrooms, for now, until they both felt ready for the next step, Alexander caught Clara's hand. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For not giving up on me when I was cold and distant. For seeing past the walls I'd built. For loving my son as if he were your own. For being brave enough to take a chance on us. Clara squeezed his hand. Thank you for letting me in. For trusting me with your heart and your son. For showing me that fairy tales can be real, even if they start with a maid and a billionaire and a fake collapse. They laughed together, the sound echoing through the mansion that was finally, truly a home. And in the nursery, Thomas dreamed peacefully, surrounded by love from the father who'd learned to open his heart and the woman who'd taught him how to feel again. The test that had started as manipulation had revealed a truth neither of them expected. Sometimes love appears in the most unlikely places, with the most unlikely people, in the most unlikely ways. But when it's real, when it's built on honesty, trust, and genuine care, it can transform everything. Alexander had pretended to collapse to expose his fiancée's true nature. But in the end, Clara's reaction hadn't just stunned the mansion. It had healed a broken heart, united a fragmented family, and proved that real love still existed in a world that often felt cynical and cold. And that was the greatest revelation of all. 6 months later, on Thomas's first birthday, Clara officially adopted him. 2 months after that, she and Alexander were married in a small ceremony in the mansion's garden, with Thomas as their ring bearer and Mrs. Chen crying happy tears in the front row. The mansion was filled with laughter, love, and the sound of a family that had found each other in the most unexpected way. And they lived, if not perfectly, then honestly and fully, and with tremendous love, which, in the end, was all that mattered.